Welcome everybody to this presentation on healthy pedagogy or using virtual break rooms to enhance student well-being in your economics course. My name is Joab. I'm an associate professor of teaching and economics at the University of California, Riverside. I also am a volunteer boxing coach that coaches the UC Riverside Boxing Club and a volunteer scuba dive master that helps teach the scuba dive classes at UC Riverside as well. So I'm very big into being active and trying to engage in things that are hopefully going to make people healthy. So with that in mind, I've incorporated some of that into my classroom, and I'm here to show you how. Before we get there, though, some kind of concerning statistics about mental and physical health. So in doing some research, I found out that mental and physical health is an ongoing and rising concern for students, particularly in the United States. It says during the 2020-2021 school year, more than 60% of college students met the criteria for at least one mental health problem, according to a Healthy Mind study, which collects data from 373 campuses nationwide. In another national survey, almost 3/4 of students reported moderate or severe psychological distress, and young people ages 18 to 22, which is a prime demographic for college-aged students, are significantly more likely to be lonely than any other generation in the United States. As far as physical health is concerned, during the pandemic here in the United States, we were on lockdown and completing classes remotely, and that means that there was a reduction in physical activity. In particular, walking, moderate, vigorous, and total physical activity levels were reduced during the COVID-19 pandemic confinements in university students of different countries. Right. Research also indicates that most college students are not meeting physical activity guidelines. So with that in mind, I wanted to find a way to encourage healthy habits among my students and at the same time maybe encourage them to increase their cognitive abilities as well. In a book entitled Learner-Centered Teaching, Putting the Research on Learning into Practice, right, by Terry Doyle, there are 3 cognitive enhancements that have been well tested and do enhance cognitive function. And those include exercise, meditation, and some computer games. So we know that mental and physical health is a rising concern. We know that exercise, meditation, and some computer games will enhance cognition. So with that in mind, I want to welcome you all to my virtual break room. All right, so if you click into my Canvas course site, this is the kind of thing that you will see. Right, for every learning module, I have a virtual break room attached. Every virtual break room has a exercise break where students actually get up out of their chair and engage in whatever the exercise challenge might be. This first Module 1 virtual break room includes what I call the Baby Shark Ab Challenge, where people do different core exercises to that popular children's theme song, Baby Shark. And for every exercise challenge, I also have a section called Pass the Prof, which is my score for the exercise challenge. So I was able to do this particular workout 3 consecutive times with no more than 15 seconds of break between the rounds. And if I also posted up here, if you want to take the Baby Shark Ab Challenge, then you need to complete the workout once a day for 30 straight days. So this Baby Shark Ab Challenge is just about 1.5 minutes long, just enough to get students out of their chair, moving around a little bit, and give them a break from their learning. And again, if they are completing this class remotely, whenever they are going through this particular learning module, they can always pop in this virtual break room and do this. Right? When they're completing my class in a face-to-face setting, we don't do this in the actual classroom, right? But I have this available to them still so that whenever they're completing their assignments from home, they can always pop into this virtual break room as well. Right. Now, in addition to an exercise break for each of my virtual break rooms, I also include a relaxation break. This thing might include a 5-minute guided meditation or stretching session. It might include a few breathing exercises, right? Again, just ways for people to calm down and engage that meditation that we know improves cognition. In addition to that, I also offer an intellectual break, which is a virtual escape room. And with that virtual escape room, students can actually unlock clues and use that to get out of the room. And if they get out, they get a digital badge saying that they escaped. And then finally, I have what is known as the Good Vibes discussion board, right? This is just a traditional discussion board where I say only good vibes are allowed, and students can either post their scores from the exercise challenge, post their time in escaping the virtual break room, virtual escape room, or they can just write some funny story or anecdote that they have from the material in that particular module. Right, so again, it's just a way for students to communicate with one another and hopefully avoid that loneliness that we know is plaguing those 18 to 22-year-olds. Right, so that's kind of what this virtual break room looks like. Right, now to give you an idea of what that digital escape room looks like, I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance to poke around in there as well. Right, but I want you to kind of make this known that I was able to develop this by going to this website called Ditch That Textbook, where for a one-time $19 fee, you get a lifetime prescription that grants you access to the pre-formatted materials. That's going to make it a lot easier to create these virtual escape rooms. Right, so again, if you are interested, just check that out, and you should be able to make these rooms a lot more quickly and easily. Right, I know I was able to after paying that $19 fee. But again, if we click on this link here, it's going to take you to a Google slide. Right, with that in mind, if we go to view and slideshow mode here, then you're going to see, again, this is what the digital escape room looks like. All a student has to do is click on this lock, and it will bring up a Google form with a story that says, "Oh no, you've been accidentally locked in your economic professor's classroom. In order to get out, you must click around the room to uncover clues that unlock the doors. Make sure you read each clue carefully as you attempt to solve the riddles that will allow you to escape. Feel free to work in groups or try it on your own. This is just for fun and will not be graded, but you can time yourself using a stopwatch on your phone, and your group can post the time in the discussion board for bragging rights. Good luck and have fun." As you can see with each of these clues, right, it not only gives you the type of lock it is, like in this case an 8-letter word lock, right, but it also gives you the formatting. So all lowercase letters, no spaces, and an example. This is the kind of things you learn if you go ahead and pay that $19 fee that will give you access to a tutorial about how to create these rooms. But if you click on that virtual escape room, again, there are things in this room here that are clickable that are related to the material from Chapter 1, which is in Module 1, where you can find this virtual break room. So clicking on, for example, this bulletin board, it says, "What is economics?" And it says here, economics, aside from being really cool, is a study of how people make choices under, and that's going to be the answer to one of those clues, right? So the answer is, of course, scarcity. Now, if a student has been taking my class and actually showing up to the lectures, they should know that, because that's one of the first things that we go over in that course. But even if they were to miss that day, they could still potentially figure it out, because if you just look at the bolded letters here, SCARCITY, you can see that the bolded letters there actually spell out scarcity. So that's what some of these types of clues might look like as students are trying to attempt to escape the room. Right, so with that in mind, that's kind of how I use these virtual break rooms to break up the monotony of the learning activities. Right, give students a chance to get up out of their seat, move around a little bit, give students a chance to take a breather or relax using that relaxation break, or give students a chance to interact with the material in this kind of critical thinking type way and using it to solve these riddles and escape the room. And finally, a chance to interact with each other using that social break or that good vibes discussion board. Right, so with that in mind, I was curious as to what student feedback I would get from this. So with every class I teach, I have a midterm teacher evaluation where I ask students what's going well, what can I improve upon, and on the learning term in which I instituted this virtual break room, I also asked them this question on the midterm teacher evaluation. It says, "For this class, I have added a virtual break room to each module that contains an exercise challenge, a relaxation break, a virtual escape room that corresponds to the information in each module, and a discussion board. Have you explored the optional module break rooms yet? And if so, what was your favorite part? And if not, why not? Do you like having a virtual break available, or do you feel like it just clutters up the module in an already busy class?" So having asked that question, here are some of the responses I've gotten on that midterm teacher evaluation. They can be divided into 3 categories: the good, the bad, and the kind of response where it's like, students haven't really explored it, but they kind of like the idea that it's there. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read each of these responses to you, but you can kind of pause the video and read them for yourselves if you like. Here are the positive responses concerning the virtual break rooms in general. And then we also have some positive responses kind of calling out specific parts of the virtual break room. The negative responses really weren't all that bad or all that negative. They're basically saying that the virtual break room is something that they haven't really checked out yet and might make the module appear longer, which makes it feel like there's more work even though it is indeed optional. And then the responses are from students who haven't really had the time to check it out yet, but kind of like the idea that it's there because it shows that the instructor cares about them as an individual and cares about their learning. Right, so again, feel free to check out any of these responses by pausing the video and reading them. But this is the feedback that I have received so far. So thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions or feedback about these virtual break rooms, feel free to contact me by email. Hopefully you got something out of this presentation and you might be considering using those virtual break rooms in your own class. If so, I definitely look forward to hearing from you. Until then, stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Hello everyone, we're EeCheng and Zhang from the National University of Singapore. The topic of our presentation is the unknown unknowns, concept checks to address illusions of knowing. Let me begin with a scene from the British sitcom Yes Minister. In this scene, Hacker, the minister, is trying to ask questions because he suspects that his permanent secretary, Humphrey, is withholding information. As we can see from the dialogue, Hacker struggles to ask the right question because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. This is exactly what may happen in our classrooms. As novice learners, students are unaware of their blind spots. They cannot ask questions because they don't know what they don't know. On the other hand, as domain experts, we tend to overestimate the depth of students' understanding, and we also don't know what the students don't know. To be more precise, students operate in a state of unconscious incompetence, and instructors are often in a state of unconscious competence. The gap between these two stages may create difficulties for instructors to design effective assessments. For example, this is a typical exercise in economics. Students are asked to solve for the competitive equilibrium in an exchange economy. From our experience, this type of exercise alone is often insufficient to help students develop mastery. This is because solving for the equilibrium requires integration and application of multiple component skills and knowledge. But the exercise does not explicitly ask students to recall the definition of competitive equilibrium, to identify the utility functions, or to apply utility maximization. As a result, some students may struggle with decomposing the exercise, and they may instead resort to something more tangible, the math. They end up focusing on memorizing and practicing the procedural knowledge, which is the mathematical steps, and overlook the conceptual knowledge that is crucial in making the math meaningful. Over time, they may form a habit of mechanically solving problems without understanding the economics underlying the math. To address these issues, we developed a pedagogical approach which we call the concept check. We have used concept checks in our microeconomic classes at all levels. They are short, unpacked questions aimed to develop conceptual and metacognitive knowledge, and they are framed in a novel manner to discourage mechanical memorization. For example, we do not ask the question, what is the definition of Pareto efficiency in a concept check? So how do we formulate a concept check? There are 3 steps. The first step is to identify the learning bottleneck. In economics, students may encounter difficulties when they acquire component knowledge or skills, as economic concepts are inherently abstract. They may also face problems integrating component knowledge or skills. 2 types of integration are common in economics. One is the organization of distinct but related concepts. Another is the integration of economic concepts, mathematical equations, and graphs. Finally, students may have trouble applying their knowledge. The concept checks target the first 2 kinds of learning bottlenecks. Developing the ability to apply knowledge is something that is more appropriately tackled in problem sets. Once the learning bottleneck has been identified, we need to articulate the learning objective. The learning objective is based on the learning bottleneck. To guide the construction of a concept check, the learning objective should be as precise as possible. So let's look at an example. Students tend to be confused about Pareto efficient allocations and competitive equilibrium allocations. A broad learning objective could be framed as learning objective 1. However, this framing does not pinpoint the deep features of the two concepts, so it provides little guidance in constructing a concept check. Instead, we could write a learning objective that is more specific. One possibility is to focus on the relationship between the two types of allocations, and this is learning objective 2. Alternatively, we could highlight how the endowment allocation matters or does not matter, and this is learning objective 3. The last step is to design the concept check. Here are some key features of the concept check. The detailed, targeted learning objective requires the concept check to have a single correct answer. We also eliminate the math and include only the necessary information to enable students to focus on the conceptual meaning. Concept checks are to be conducted in class, so it should not be too long or time-consuming, and it should be ideally pollable to get immediate feedback. When designing the concept checks, we use Bloom's revised taxonomy to guide our discussion of the cognitive processes. Developing conceptual mastery generally involves remembering, understanding, analyzing, and evaluating. And a concept check usually harnesses more than one cognitive process. So let's return to the examples to look at how we could construct concept checks. Starting with learning objective 2. To fulfill this learning objective, students must be guided to recall the definitions and discriminate a Pareto efficient allocation from a competitive equilibrium allocation. One way to construct the concept check is to have students answer a series of true or false questions. By working through the 4 statements, students structure their knowledge and build connections between the two concepts. To fulfill learning objective 3, the concept check should lead students to recall the definitions and guide them to infer whether an endowment allocation is instrumental to the characterization of an allocation as Pareto efficient or as a competitive equilibrium. A concept check can be constructed as follows. We show an Edgeworth box with 2 different endowment allocations and 2 other allocations, and ask students the following questions. To answer these questions, students must be able to identify the allocations and curves in the graph, interpret from the graphical representation whether an allocation is Pareto efficient or whether it is a competitive equilibrium, and finally, make inferences.
So how do we conduct a concept check? So we do it as an in-class exercise. Students think about the question for a few minutes, and then we poll students, so they're more invested in finding out what the correct answer is. We share student responses. For selected response questions, where students choose from a menu of options, such as multiple choice questions or true or false questions, we can display the distribution of responses because the data is easily summarized. For constructed response questions, where students are going to supply their own answers, we can highlight the common responses, so both the correct responses and the incorrect responses. Here's an example of a distribution of student responses from my class. About 75% of students are getting these questions correct. Students can see that they are not the only ones who are struggling. This helps to build a community of learners. This helps to build a sense of solidarity. And after this, we explain the solution. So this is probably the most important step in the whole process. So we show how to approach a problem, and there are a few different ways we can think about this. So one possible permutation is to explain the reasoning but not the answer, and then poll students again. And ideally, we want to see students converging towards the correct answer. Another possibility is to provide extension questions and have students think about those questions when they go home. We revisit the extension questions in the next class. When should a concept check be conducted? Immediately after the new concept is introduced, in the next class, or in a review session before an exam. So there are pros and cons for each option. We think that the sweet spot is in the next class because students would have worked on a few simple exercises. They would probably have made some mistakes or become a little confused, and that's fantastic because then they're more ready to absorb the lessons from the concept check. Ex-post evaluation. After each class, we reflect on the effectiveness of the concept check, and we ask ourselves a few questions. For example, was the learning bottleneck correctly identified? Was the learning objective realized? Was the concept check too complicated? And depending on what weaknesses we discover, we modify the concept check for the next iteration of the class. Sometimes, the concept check may reveal new areas of misunderstanding, and this is fantastic. We repeat the cycle. We identify the learning bottleneck, articulate the learning objective, and try to write a concept check that will address the learning objective. So what do students say about the concept checks? Student response has been very positive. In a survey in the Advanced Micro course, 98% of students found the concept checks helpful. And here are some comments in our student feedback reports. Useful in helping me identify what I didn't know I didn't understand well enough. Reflective of learning gaps. Very thought-provoking, testing, breaking down, and building back up our understanding of microconcepts. So we think that concept checks are applicable in almost every economics class that requires some sort of conceptual understanding. They can be easily scaled up. Our classes have a few hundred students, and the immediacy of feedback helps students calibrate their understanding and prevents misconceptions from becoming entrenched. Thank you.
I'm Brandon Sheridan, and I'm an associate professor of economics with nearly 15 years of teaching experience at multiple types of institutions. Regardless of your institution type or class size, my goal is to provide you with a framework to continually improve your teaching and incorporate more active learning techniques. Oftentimes, we as instructors are inspired by books, colleagues, and conferences to try something new in the classroom. However, the gap of time between the end of the conference and the beginning of the next semester is usually quite large. Even if you do retain that enthusiasm for trying something new, that excitement may disappear as the realities of the semester start to materialize with things like committee meetings, grading, advising, etc. Or maybe that's just me. I created this framework for my own benefit so that I could improve as an instructor, and I hope that it helps you too. Active learning is something that we're all familiar with, and one thing the education literature clearly shows is that students perform better when instructors use active learning techniques rather than lecturing. When students are actively engaged in the learning process instead of passively listening to an expert, they retain more information, leading to higher exam scores, higher pass rates, and better retention. However, incorporating new techniques into your course is challenging, and it requires a bit of planning if you want to do it well. I believe there are 3 mutually reinforcing steps you can take to ensure that you follow through with your plan. Think of these like the legs of a stool. The first leg is the semester plan, and I suspect that this part of your stool is already the strongest. My recommendation here is for a broad semester plan that gives you a quick overview of what you intend to accomplish, coupled with a weekly plan of what you and your students will be doing during class. This will reduce your cognitive load and allow you to be more efficient during the semester. It's okay if it's incomplete the first time that you run through the process, because you're going to be doing this multiple times. You're going to revise this each time at the end of the semester. There are many existing resources to help you do this, including Barkley and Major and their excellent resource, Interactive Lecturing, as well as Chi Wiley's ICAT framework. Broadly speaking, you want to identify your learning goals, decide how you will help the students learn, determine the best way to assess your students have met your learning goals, and then within all of this, you need to consider your own situational factors, such as your class size, whether or not you plan to attend any conferences, academic calendar, etc. In addition to the broad semester plan, and here's an example of what mine looks like. It's very simple, broad overview of each week. In addition to this broad semester plan, you should also create a weekly plan where you're going to break down exactly what you and your students will be doing during a given class. This part might be something that you fill out more as you go, but it's a really helpful tool to have when trying to incorporate new learning techniques, because it allows you to pre-plan and pre-commit to implementing that new thing, and then helps keep you on track during class. The second part of the stool is the self-reflection, and I suspect this may be more new to some of you. So what I propose here is a brief self-reflection, maybe 10 minutes per week, where you think about essentially the rose, the thorn, and the bud of your week. In other words, what went well, what did not go well, and what might you need to revise or add the next time you teach the lesson. 1 or 2 sentences for each item is sufficient, but you can adjust it to fit your style. Remember, it may be months or longer before you teach this course again, so this encourages you to keep a running log of what is going well in the course and what needs improvement. By the end of the semester, you'll have 10 to 15 pages of notes, which can then be used to revise the semester the next time that you teach it. So in all, this should take about 10 minutes, and here is an example of what mine looks like. So I have an overall assessment where I assign a subjective Likert scale type rating, which I can then use to track over time, along with my notes to myself. I also recommend DART. DART is the Decibel Analysis for Research and Teaching. It's a freely available web application that was created to help measure active learning. Again, it should only take a few minutes once you sort of get used to using the software, which is freely available online. You can read more about it at the QR code or search Google Scholar for the DART paper by Melinda Owens and co-authors. I also wrote a paper with Ben Smith where we had instructors record their class sessions and then use DART to process the recordings to see how much active learning took place. What we found was that instructors way overestimated how active they are. You can read that paper at the blue QR code. I now use this though to help me reflect my own teaching practice. There are many caveats to using this software and thinking about how to interpret it, but for me it's useful to see the time I spend using active learning exercises and see if my intentions match what I actually do, and then I can adjust from there. If you can remember to record your classes and have just a few extra minutes to use the software each week, you can greatly enhance your reflective process and ultimately your teaching. The final part of the stool is the most challenging part because it requires you to depend on another person. So for this, you're going to need to identify someone you can talk to about the progress of your course. Once every 2 to 3 weeks should be sufficient, but of course you can adjust that to meet your needs. Why do we want to do this? Because we perform better when we're accountable, when we have that person that we have to report to, and because we want to continually improve. So both of those things suggest that an accountability partner would be helpful for us. So how do we do this? Again, I suggest finding someone, an individual partner that you can meet with every so often rather than a group. Groups can become unwieldy if you have too many people, and then you may not get as much accomplished, or that may take more time. But of course that will be up to you. Meetings can be brief, maybe 15-20 minutes, so that you can each discuss your own courses and offer feedback. Also, this is a good time for positive reinforcement, which should help alleviate some of that imposter syndrome that we all encounter. It would be great if this person is in your department and teaching the same course, or maybe has taught the course before, because the feedback that you give and the feedback that you receive is going to be more meaningful and more specific if somebody has that specific content knowledge. But the reality is, you may be from a small department or one where your colleagues don't value teaching the same way that you do. In that case, you need to seek out someone from another department or campus, or maybe even another institution. Today's technology makes it easy to correspond remotely, and I've included a link to a Google Sheet in the comments below where you can sign up as someone who is looking for an accountability partner. You'll also see who else has already signed up and the subject that they will be teaching and whether or not they already have a partner. So there you have it, the success stool. I hope it's helpful for you. It's an easy, customizable framework that you can adapt to your own context. I encourage you to give it a try and let me know how it's going.